Отже, шановні колеги,
Dear colleagues, dear journalists, Ukrainian Crisis Media Center starts its work today. We start with a very important topic. We will have a discussion concerning people's power through referendum, analysis and consequences of the law. This topic is really important. Last week, the Verkhovna Rada in the second reading voted for the law on referendum. At the same time, a lot of issues appeared, and there are some concerns that this law may be used not to the benefit of Ukraine. That's why we started this public discussion of this law. We invited representatives of different political forces, and plenary week in the Verkhovna Rada continues. They were not able to take part in this discussion. This is not so bad. Today we'll have an expert discussion, and we will be trying to deal with this issue in order to understand what are the benefits of the law and what risks may appear. I'm glad to introduce our speakers. We have Oleksandr Klyuzhev, Senior Analyst of OPORA Network. Good afternoon. Valeriy Klochok, Political and Economic Analyst of Growford Institute, and Gennady Drucheren, Head of the Board of Center for Constitutional Modeling. Also, Petro Burkovsky, through Zoom, Senior Analyst of Ilko Foundation. Ihor Popov will join us soon, politologist and expert of Ukrainian Institute of the Future. And we will assess this law, and I hope that our discussion will be fruitful. Dear audience, you may ask your questions in comments. We will be asking our speakers, and then you will get your answers. So first, the overall assessment of this law. We will give several minutes to each of the speakers, and then we will have Q&A session, and we'll dismantle some myths, and we'll speak about some issues concerning this draft law. So I give the floor to the first speaker. I cannot hear him. First of all, I would like to speak about the draft law and its historical background. It happens so. We have many norms in Constitution, and when we speak about implementation of the norm of the law, it happens so that it is impossible to do because there is no proper law to implement. This is a classic issue. I bring often an example of such a term as coalition in the Verkhovna Rada. We have it in Constitution. But when we are speaking about the deputies, and they are missing here today, when I ask them, how do you regulate these issues? So how we may develop this norm in the regulations. We do not have it in the regulations. We had the same story with the referendum. We had the law. It was cancelled in 2018. There were many issues concerning this law. Different assessments were provided. Political battles happened. And now this issue is regulated. And this law is the promise of our president that he gave during his electoral campaign. And the law on the referendum has been prepared for a long time. There were many discussions. There was a preliminary preparatory stage, and the document is of quality. There is a lot of criticism concerning the use of the document in political purposes, but the experts, and I also believe so, and I believe that, and they believe that this is a good compromise concerning implementation of Constitution. It is great that we have such a law. We should understand that it is great to have a law that helps us to implement this law in accordance with Constitution. Our right to participate in democracy, in people power. So this law is rather difficult. These norms are rather difficult concerning implementation of law. For example, to initiate this referendum, because you need 3 million of signatures. For example, you can get 3,000 and to have a referendum, and there will be a parade of referendum, and there is a political component, because, for example, only oligarchs may do this. Simple people cannot do this. And democracy, people power, it should be used really carefully. There should not be populism. We cannot initiate a referendum concerning any topic. And we cannot just use it in case of some minor issues, and there are maybe some controversial issues. And the parliament should take into account the mistakes that will be in the course of practical implementation. We should not be idealists concerning this. Any document has its drawbacks, and the parliament will correct these mistakes. But if we are speaking about this document may have good prospects in its practical implementation. About the number of issues for the referendum, maybe this is an issue for discussion. There should not be just one issue, one point. We have the experience of holding of all Ukrainian referendums. There are no local referendums in this law. We had all Ukraine referendum during Kuchma's time, and I won't go into detail who participated in this referendum. So this was an interesting story, and it had practical implementation, and we may speak about this issue. And it is difficult. There is one speculation concerning this this law, that it introduces some norms that are not envisaged by Constitution, but this is not true. It deals only with the issues concerning that are envisaged by Constitution. And also, there is no opportunity to decrease the territory of the country. In the second article, it is clearly stated, and some people say that some referendum may be held in non-controlled territories, but there is one limitation. First, you should get these 3 million signatures. Also, there is no opportunity there to hold local referendums. And there will be a law on this soon. It is in the preparation stage. And we should be really careful about local referendums in Ukraine. And the issues that can be brought to all Ukrainian referendums, these are also important issues for discussion. So, and also about financing. What I want to say that this is costly. 2 billion hryvnias are needed. So this norm, it will be a restrictive speculative factor, whether we have the right to spend the money of taxpayers for such occasions. We pay these taxes. That's why we may decide whether we want to spend this money for such issues of nationwide issues. Also about CEC, responsibilities, they are colossal. They may provide the right for this referendum, or they may not provide this right. We clearly understand how this the composition of CEC is formed. This board is politicized, and deputies should pay attention to this. There are many speculation issues concerning influence, political influence on CEC. So I believe, and this is the intermediary conclusion, I would like to greet you with the adoption of this document. There are a lot of restrictive factors, and we should continue to monitor the situation.
Thank you. Understood your point of view, Nadi. We understood that what was signed and passed is positive, but there are some nuances in it, and we're happy to welcome new participant. Thank you for joining us. I'm happy to welcome all the participants, and the direct power of the people is provided by the Constitution. So I think we should assess this passage of the law on referendum as a positive thing, but discussing advantages and disadvantages of this new piece of legislation, I would suggest to look at it in broader international context. We are striving to move towards the Western standards, and that's why I suggest to review some major focal points. By the end of 20th century, almost 80% of countries in the world have had at least one referendum in their history. And actually, we observe that the number of referenda happening in different countries. Currently, we're discussing only national referenda. It goes upwards, so the general number goes upwards. Europe is an absolute champion in holding national referenda. In Europe, we witnessed 1,059 national referenda against 191 in Africa, 180 in Asia, in ocean countries, something like several dozens. Of course, we understand that we have Switzerland here, we have Germany, we have France, who are co-founders of the Soviet Union, and they have referenda. Only such countries as Belgium haven't had referendum since 1950. Then Germany is rather reluctant now about referenda. Because partially they have trauma from the Nazi times, and nevertheless the referendum about reunion with the with Eastern Germany was not held, and some other countries like the United States, where they do not have the national or federal referendum, but they have the referenda at the level of the individual states. And there they have different types of referenda, and there are special cases when they have this referenda. And also we have a champion champion in direct democracy in the United States, as the state of California. California could be compared to Ukraine in terms of the number of population, at least, and I may ask you why such people as Mr. Elon Musk and other captains of industry, they are very eager to reside in such states where there is direct democracy. This suggests that there is something very attractive in it. And I believe that this instrument, this tool is very and could be very useful for Ukraine. Thank you for this introductory explanation about Germany, about the United States. So thus we understood that the topic about referenda is a bit over politicized these days, and we should look on this issue from with unbiased eyes. Oleksandr, you represent the Civic network OPORA. What is your opinion? Observing the passage of that law, we clearly saw the fight of two radical trends, and the first position and first trend was related to the view that we need to establish the national referendum institution and then pass all the most important issues in this country, pass them through referendum. That diminished considerably the role of the parliament, etc. The second radical trend was that we do not trust Ukrainian people considerably, and we cannot rely on the opinion of Ukrainian people making crucial decisions for the future of this country. So looking at what was passed, we clearly understand that we tried to balance this two radical point of view. What is dangerous in both that controversial approaches. If we go after the first approach, this may ruin the decision making in the country. So this is the major threat with direct democracy and referenda at each and every issue to be voted via referenda. The second approach deprives people from decision making considerably, because it provides the view that this is only the elite in power who should take decisions, and that Ukrainian people should be deprived from that totally. Actually, the mechanism which was approved allows Ukrainian people to use it when there is the situation of sharp of a significant conflict in society, it would allow to resolve such an issue via direct democracy. And we expect that this approved tool, this referenda law, would allow us to resolve the most crucial issues and find solutions to the most crucial situations. So the first the first point in the system of checks and balances against the abuse of this mechanism is the rule that the norm that the referendum could be used for passing any law. This is quite useful. That is, we cannot pass on the referendum decision about territorial integrity and national security. Thinking about this aspect, we should keep in mind that if some perpetrators who wish to ruin Ukrainian territorial integrity, they do not need actually any laws. They are able to reach what they want, to implement what they want, even by passing any core of legislation. So in general, I believe that this law should be assessed positively and that it has its advantages. Of course, there are some omissions or disadvantages. We have, for example, a provision that some laws in Ukraine could be repealed via referendum. But here you should keep in mind that without such a possibility to repeal some specific norms or the whole law, without such a possibility, the law about referendum would be very empty. So we can not deal with the territorial integrity at the referendum. We cannot deal with the specific laws dealing with national security, etc. But we can attack via referendum some minor laws which might be nevertheless important for the population. Petro, quite often in discussions around this law, we may hear that the referendum may cost, that any referendum may cost up to 2 billion of hryvnia, and maybe opinion polls might be the good substitution and much cheaper substitute for that expensive mechanism. And quite often your institution democratic initiatives organizes such opinion polls. How do you think whether it's true or whether it is false opinion? Trying to answer your questions, I would start from my general characteristic of the law. I agree that the law about referendum is mentioned in Ukrainian constitution to implement the general statement about direct power that could be exercised by Ukrainian people. But my analysis of the text of the law, which was prepared for the second reading, with the comments from the main Department of Legislative Analysis of the Parliament, and that comments that I read carefully, they suggest that in case of the national referenda on national issues, the results of the such referendum will become compulsory for implementation. But the legal department pointed out that Constitution says nothing that this should be compulsory for implementation. For example, this might be appealed to the Constitutional Court, and in its turn, the Constitutional Court may use this omission or this absence of norm in the Constitution about compulsory nature of the referendum results and may repeal or reject the results of the referendum. Then the Constitution says nothing about about repealing of some norms. For example, the referendum may approve repealing of some laws, but again, this could be appealed to the Constitutional Court, and it can make a decision that this conflicts with the intentions and norms of the Constitution. And the third, the procedure about approval of the international treaties signed by Ukraine. This is clearly and fully the responsibility of the parliament, and it conflicts with the new law, and we may potentially have such a situation that if Ukrainian people wish to pass any treaty signed but not approved by the Verkhovna Rada, this again, the situation will raise the conflict with the Constitution. So actually, this may result in a very big potentially conflict situations in society. As to your question, what issues might be brought to the referendum? So the law says that the issues of general importance might be brought to referendum, and Yulia Tymoshenko-Black mentioned 5 such issues. And when you look at the list of those issues, you clearly see that according to the opinion polls, people will definitely stand for the voting of those issues in the referendum, and you may assume that in result of the referendum, the majority of people will vote for the decrease of energy tariffs. But imagine that more than 50% of voters come to the polling stations and that they vote for the decrease of the tariffs. What will happen next? So the risks of populism do not disappear with the passage of this law, and actually you can bring almost any issue under the highlight of the issue of primarily state importance and put it for voting and put it on referendum just based on that suggestion. Mr. Valeriy, I was very pleased to see that in course of the discussion on this law, we observed a true debate, very hot debate on the essence of the law. The issue had political nature and discussion whether the people of Ukraine have the right on direct people's power was quite interesting, and I believe it was very useful. Moreover, each discussion about the subject of any potential referendum will have political nature and may turn into deep political discussion. I think that the real political situation in Ukraine indicates that this tool should exist, although it may not obligatory be used. And in my opinion, there may be two potential reasons why we should be able to resolve the issue via referendum. There might be the difference in opinions between society and politicians about the territories of Ukraine. For example, when the issue of Crimea and Donbass was raised by Leonid Kravchuk in the public sphere, and in such a situation, we may ask people, and the power will be able, people in power will be able to make decision based on the people's opinion. And the second situation, when we may find ourselves in a situation of seeking for the referendum. For example, the politician may take a decision which is strongly opposed by population, for example, on the issues of land. For example, today, Ukrainian people do not think that the law on land will not be beneficial for Ukrainian people. You may ask people about the model of the land market, and they would answer this question. Here I understand President Zelensky, who had come to power as a counter-systemic politician, and from the very beginning he kept saying that the people's power is part of his position, basic position, and the authors of the law had drafted this law as a deterring measure, some limiting measure for the politicians who may pass the laws, and in case the laws passed by politicians are extremely controversial for the population, this would be a good instrument for people to express their opinion.
So there are many threats, many risks, and the history of Ukrainian referendums, it is not so happy. Referendums often are associated with illegal referendums in Donbass and in Crimea, and this may threaten national security. These may be manipulations, and Gennady speak a lot about experience in the West, but we remember Brexit, and we understand that referendum may be a risk of external intervention of hybrid character. So there are such risks. So what are the safeguards? And how this law may prevent the threats to territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine? Maybe this is the most important issue. Who wants to answer? And I would like to say about Brexit. People say that this is a negative example, but there is a good tradition in Britain. Johnson, together with Conservatives, they got a landslide and a very big victory concerning Brexit. Some people say that Brexit is Russian interference and a negative example of people's power of the country where there is sustainable democracy. So the elites went along this way. This was not an obligatory referendum, and now we see what happens with the vaccination. So, and Britain now has 10% of those who were vaccinated, and in Europe they have only 2%. We may change now our opinion concerning Brexit, how it was. The opinion differs. So-called referendums in Crimea and Donbass. Some people say that, for example, if there was a road accident, then we should not allow people to drive. So this is the same. These referendums, they were under the barrels of guns, and I would like to remind you that if we follow this logic, then we should ban the parliament because, for example, Crimean parliament, they provided for this referendum, and people were not free to vote because guns were pointed at them. So these referendums were manipulations. In Switzerland, they had these referendums historically, and I know well about American experience. And of 19th century, there were robber barons at that time, people who usurped power. They had great capitals, and they bought politicians. And there was a movement to return the power to the people. And, for example, at the time, Carnegie, Stanford, they bought politicians, and then Western states, starting with the Southern Dakota, they introduced direct democracy, 50-50 system, and there was direct democracy, and they introduced additional instrument to return power to people. And whether people can be manipulated, yes, but the parliament also can be manipulated. And common sense says that parliament is deputies are easily bought. And Mr. Matsuzaki analyzed more than 100 initiatives that reach success. It shows that the influence of business, big business on people's power is less than on parliamentarians. So this instrument should not be cancelled. We should not make this instrument absolute. In Ukraine, we cannot say, for example, that Crimea belongs to Russia, or we cannot cancel sovereignty. At the same time, we may speak about the results of Kuchma's referendum, but this country was born due to referendum. There were 2 referendums in 1990, and people forget that between these referendums there were very important historic events. In spring 1990, Ukrainians were ready to create a renewed Soviet Union, like Hetman Skoropadsky's Central Assembly. Also, there is a historic tradition in Ukraine like this, but then Ukrainians understood that this may turn into totalitarian state once again, and they decided to leave. So the elitism in Ukraine has no grounds. If we had elites like in Great Britain or in Singapore, so then they would have great GDP, infrastructure, happiness index would skyrocketed. And we see that we have the smallest GDP in Europe, loss of territories, open conflict, big mistrust to power, and parliamentarians in 30 years. We have now 9th convocation, and deputies were not able to prove that they can be reliable. And people vote for Zelensky, who says that he will return power to people. And this is right in Ukrainian context. And otherwise, we will have more aristocratic rule, but we do not have a proper aristocracy in Ukraine. Bourgeoisie use prosecutor's office, courts, parliament, president, and I do not know how it will work, but this will prevent the so people come to power, then they forget about people, and this law will provide preventive measure. And the last thing about lack of deliberations. So in referendum, there are no reading. First reading, second reading, conclusion and opinion of experts, and the law cannot be adopted through referendum. A deliberative process is included, and the mechanisms are not deprived of this yes or no. And in California, there is direct democracy, and the parliament cannot cancel or introduce changes to those laws that were adopted during referendum. And in US, they have it like this about quasi-referendums in Crimea and Donbass. This is a manipulative issue and cannot sustain any criticism. But nevertheless, if we have this law, then this will help us to prevent actions against sovereignty. So this prevents the quasi-referendums, and in essence, some groups who initiated all these processes, they referred to some constitutional articles, and the law complicates these illegal actions. And as I've said in the beginning, for the illegal groups who have external support, no laws are limiting in implementation of such technologies. And there are some points about changes of territory. There are constitutional provisions, and no one invented something new. There is implementation of constitution. In case of international agreement, when the parliament adopted it, sent it to the president sent this agreement concerning change of territory to the parliament with this signature. Then the mechanism is in place concerning adoption of such an issue. This is a constitutional procedure, and no one invented anything. This is a three-layered verification of this important decision concerning change of territory. And we have a great task, politicians, experts, and we are grateful for this analysis to prevent these manipulations around this mechanism, because such manipulations, they part of society, they see that some political class say that you are not capable, you are stupid, you cannot take decision, and this part of society will refer to those who say that these politicians are bad and we are good, and there are risks of manipulation. Some people mention even Hitler. And we should stop this. And about abuse of this law, I fear that this law will be used as a mechanism of political trolling. The procedure is rather complicated. You cannot put any issue. The procedure is costly. Politicians are rational. They won't start procedure if they do not see that there will be 50% and a proper result. And in the process of their strategy implementation, they may just throw the state and people with initiatives that cannot stand the chance to be brought for popular vote. This will make people tired of this empty political discussions on the eve of elections, and I believe that this may happen. So this referendum may be turned into political instrument. I will be brief. Territorial integrity is an important issue of great concern in conditions of war. We have Article 3 of Constitution, and what can be and what cannot be put on a referendum. For example, liquidation of territorial integrity, of sovereignty. This issue cannot be put to referendum. We should not even mention this. These are just manipulations. If you do not know this, you should just read the law. what issues may be brought to referendum of nationwide country importance, and this is really problematic. We have one body that will decide the fate of this referendum, and the second will help. This is constitutional court, and we should have a broad discussion. Without big reform, I do not like this word reform. This reform of formation of separate institutions of power. This is not only about CEC and Constitutional Court. We won't have this efficient mechanism, and this is really needed. And about 50% of turnout. We had a precedent in the history of Ukraine. We had such a norm during elections. We needed to have 50+%, and this is difficult. And the voters do not go, and they are brought by buses. And this is not normal, but this points at other problem. There was survey concerning those who were undecided. 40+% do not know for whom they want to vote. And when we are speaking about local elections, the winner got 1.5 million votes out of 30 million. And others do not care. And this is a problem. We do not have proper political conscience among society. So 50%, it provides grounds to speak about this. Until we understand that the absolute majority, they decide legitimacy of any decision, of any power. Otherwise, we won't be able to move ahead. So there are different views, and people, they will just look at all of this and they won't understand what is going on. And we do not know where the herd will go because we do not know where the shepherd will take it. So I would like to focus your attention on the fact that without these issues, this law won't be of high quality, but this provides ideas in this direction. So in law, we have 50% of people who should go to polling stations and vote during the referendum. And this may be a big safeguard because we see that turnout in Ukraine is less. What is your take on this? This is the norm in the law that I fully support. If serious issues are considered of nationwide importance, first and second, and as I remember, third part, introduction of changes to constitution, it should be adopted through referendum. So the turnout is really important here. These are the safeguards that the minority would adopt such decisions under some circumstances or campaigning. So the referendum is important because when the society says yes, it means that this is the collective will of the people. It consists of at least half of voters. That's why it is really great. This is a powerful safeguard, and we should greet this. And also, I would like to say that Oleksandr mentioned that about the issue concerning international agreements and whether people should provide its opinion on this. There is Article 9 of Constitution. It envisages that current international agreements they should be supported by the Verkhovna Rada, and this is the part of national legislation of Ukraine. The Verkhovna Rada provides its agreement, and the president may sign or not sign. The law is signed and the law is implemented, and then it's a part of national legislation. You do not need any referendums on this. It is not envisaged. This is not a constitutional norm. Maybe people may cancel this ratification as it is envisaged by our law. This is another matter, but they cannot approve international agreements. Constitution clearly envisages these issues. These decisions are taken by the Verkhovna Rada. One remark. Here, two norms collide, two concepts collide. First, the territorial integrity and international agreements. When we are speaking about territorial integrity, we are speaking about Donbass and Crimea, but this is also about small territories. In order to provide for infrastructure, for example, the road from Odessa to Ismail, it goes through some territory of Moldova, and they have the interests in the Danube area. So 10 kilometers. So this is the change of the territory. You may measure it up to some meters, and in this case, maybe this should be done through a referendum, because territory changes only by the way of referendum, through referendum. So this is for the cases where it is really grounded. So international agreements, borders, this is outside the scope of this. So this is about minor issues.
Okay, I understand. So this is actually practical implementation, but not a large scale and important. I do not think that anybody would take from us a piece of land. There is no threat of the territorial to the territorial territorial integrity when it comes to the ratification of the Lisbon Statute. We will need to have a separate referendum. As to the threat to the territorial integrity, there are some precautions that pro-Russian forces could put to referendum some territories and cut them off from Ukraine. There were again fears that Russian forces may put decommunization on referenda, or alternatively the issue about Russian language, which is also looks rather doubtful, or maybe the issue about Russian language in household use, and pro-Russian forces these days are losing a lot of opportunities for broadcasting, massive broadcasting, and we expect that for a rather long period of time their propaganda possibilities will be closed. As for the YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter channels, perhaps it will be a possibility to block their accounts on those channels also. Thus, we will remove the threats to Ukrainian national interests. The next block of issues is related to the possibility of populist points. Petro, I think, quoted Tymoshenko's idea about 5 issues that potentially might be put to referendum immediately. Actually, we may offer a lot of similar issues that everything should be delivered free, for everything good against everything bad, and again bring these issues to the referendum. How do you think? Is it possible to prevent such a possibility and such wasting of money? Tatiana, I don't see any problem of offering such issues for the referendum. We got accustomed to the situation. Look at Norway, all the oil goes to the national fund, or all the money from oil goes to the national fund, and all the money are spread among the entire population. In Ukraine, we may do something similar. If all the subsoil resources is the property of Ukrainian people, then Ukrainian gas, which is produced from Ukrainian subsoil resources, should be distributed among Ukrainian households. That is, we have to answer whether we act within the market logic, then people have to pay, or alternatively, if Ukrainian citizens are co-owners of the subsoil property, and in this case we shift to the constitutional philosophy issues. Also, there is the article in the Constitution which suggests that the budget should be self-sufficient, and actually this prevents us from abuse of the budget issues, even despite the fact that the government continues to borrow money. I think we have good precautions in the Constitution which would prevent us from radical anti-constitutional measures. This may bring us to the new constitutional architecture and design. What was passed in the Kuchma's times was designed 24 years ago, and now there is time for the redesign of the Constitution. Perhaps it is right time to shift the Constitution to the broader discussion, and as philosophers we may take Tymoshenko's issues and look at them from the political philosophy point of view. In Georgia, part of Svanetia gets the electricity freely because they have the Ragui River, and there is a big hydropower plant in that territory, and due to this fact they get their benefits of free electricity from this power plant. Now let's come back to the issue that Yulia Tymoshenko mentioned about gambling. Let us ask ourselves a question, whether in Ukraine it is possible to get revenues and pay no taxes. Since we are the country with laws, let us make right steps and let us put preventive measures. You should, and also we should not ask questions whether it is possible to give morphine for terminally ill people. When we put 10 such issues to the referendum, and then having got positive answers, and then politicians would not be able to make false promises, and then political parties says that they may buy the votes. So I agree that there is a big problem based on the constitution. Actually, now we go back to the essence of the constitutional provisions, and we understand that complicated issues require complicated provisions. And actually, that slogans which I mentioned, they are able to ruin even what we have. Let us decide what we are discussing about populism. The parties will collect necessary number of signatures, submit them to the Central Election Committee, then they will overcome the resistance in the Constitutional Court because they have 45 MPs. Then the voters will vote, and in the result of the referendum, the Cabinet of Ministers will submit the law to the Verkhovna Rada, and eventually the Verkhovna Rada has to vote for this law. So even in case of any political forces will be ready to cover all that law and pass, I suggest that the issue is really important, and it is not our role to decide in advance whether the issue is important or not. If there are some forces in society which are ready to pass through all the procedures, then perhaps this is the right way to go. I do not think that intellectuals have to decide in advance from the very beginning which issues purely populistic or not. And about the role of the parliament as to the repealing of the laws. The law about all Ukrainian referendum provides that the law which is repealed cannot be passed within 3 years in the same version. Actually, it allows the parliament to pass a new version of the law. That the signal the parliament would get a signal from the society that society is unhappy with the current version of the law, and the parliament will be able to pass a new version of the same law which might be more acceptable for the society. As far as I understood, we reached consensus that there are sufficient precautions in the law that prevent from extremely negative things. I would like to remind you one saying that the decision of the Constitution Court from 27th of August, which says that that we allow any that strong constitutional court provisions, constitutional court solutions might be put to doubt, and the recent events proved that the constitutional court is rather creep body, and once Yulia Mostova mentioned that Ukrainian oligarchs come here to have a good safari. Via this law on referendum, we will take back our right, regain our right to rule this country. With that number of precautions that we mentioned, I do not see any threats of populism. I again will provide an example of California, which I love very much. And when you look at the history of Ukrainian, of the American history of initiatives, and the initiative number 13 from 1987. It was about decrease of tax on real estate and prohibition to raise it in future, and in result of that populistic decision, the California did not collapse. There are now more than 50 years after that initiative, and the state continues to flourish. Sometimes politicians suggest that some ideas may ruin and provisions may ruin the country, but in result of the implemented decisions, the nation gains a lot of. Then we have, I would like to mention that we have free mass media, civil society, and also experts who may stand and say, look, guys, you are trying to vote for the purely populistic solution. And also Tymoshenko suggested some economic model for tariffs, and in parallel we may assess whether the model about cannabis, medical cannabis, which is implemented now in the law, whether it is appropriate and acts in the benefits of society. Then about gambling business. Actually, the gambling business exists, and now the issue is that whether it pays taxes or it doesn't pay taxes, and that's it. I see. Nadi mentioned about Brexit. This is a rather sensitive issue. Those who support the idea of a referendum, here you need to know what happened to the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom was actually very much pressed to enter the European Union, and even the residents of the United Kingdom, they psychologically are strongly opposing the membership in the European Union. They haven't joined the European currency, and the majority in this country decided that they do not wish to stay in the European Union. Today, Brexit remains the cautious example for those who stand for the referendum and suggest that it may have most positive and negative results. Currently in media, we hear many supportive thoughts about referendum, but let us have the last round and discuss what would require the most attention for us when eventually we will decide to apply this law. I have heard the precautions about Central Election Commission. This is about Theodore Roosevelt. When he was campaigning for the president, his position was strategic. He mentioned that neither success nor the defeat of direct democracy should not be predicted in advance. It should be assessed based on the effective implementation, and it seems to me that the threat is hidden in excessive limitations. 50% of 50% attendance is very high figure. In British Columbia, they use it. They put 55% of positive vote. The Central Election Commission regains a high influence and big expectations, and actually the stakes in a game of forming the Civic for political forces become rather important. I believe that many politicians may use the referendum as the method of deterring. And I would like to point out a big problem: the access to mass media in the country. This can become a problem, and whether civil society, whether medium-sized business will be able to get access to mass media. I believe that this threshold may appear to be extremely high and prevent anybody except oligarchs from participation in the campaigning for the referendum. And the law is not a part of the Constitution. It can be amended anytime upon review and analysis of its implementation. Today we discuss precautions, and I support that precautions, but nevertheless I do not think that this law will become very popular among the users, and for Ukrainian citizens, that precautions that we discussed may become an obstacle. They would not have sufficient understanding of them, and sooner or later this may result in the further reviews of this law, although they were very much needed at this very stage. The referendum on the issues of general national interest may be used by popular and populistic leaders as a political factor. That is, nobody would bring the decisions to implementation, but those political decisions or issues might be used as a weapon in political struggle. And there might be technical risk that political parties will use the initiative of referendum as part of their political campaigns. I do not expect that we will see a huge wave of political referendum, but there might be a sort of trolling. There is a risk of trolling on behalf of political parties, and it may result in disillusion of society in this mechanism, and the devaluation of this tool might happen. And we haven't mentioned yet that unfortunately many disputes go to the administrative court, and the decisions taken by juries may not be always motivated by judicial position only. It may be motivated by political preferences. Then in some 5-10 years, the electronic voting might be introduced. I do not expect it will happen soon, but the discussion should be continued. I studied the experience of many European countries. This is a purely political issue, the issue of trust to the system, whether voters would accept the electronic voting. As of now, our voters do not trust even to the election commissions, not to mention electronic voting. And the third, I do not expect that we should expect for a high wave of referenda. I do not think that it would be possible to any civil society organization to organize it. It will become only a tool of oligarchs who will make an attempt to manipulate with the public opinion via referenda. Petro, your final precautions about risks. substantial risks. Amendments to the Constitution that establish the procedure for implementation of the decisions made in a referenda are required, and without them, any referenda will remain very expensive toys and nothing more. And there might be a risk that in course of preparation to referenda, some political forces will escalate the public opinion, and when eventually such referenda is not implemented, then it might be too easy to ignite the society, to undermine the democracy and the powers of some institutions in power, and thus promote political crisis in Ukraine. Now I'm checking whether we have any questions from the audience. We do not have any questions to the speakers. My last remark, we had very good discussion, and it seems to me that it is very beneficial that we have analyzed the bill. We have heard very interesting ideas about concentration of powers with some institutions. Preparation of quality documents should be based on the balance between inclusivity and constructive approach. That's why I would suggest that all the documents should be assessed against those two criteria. That was your statement to the political class. We will publish this discussion as a lone read text. With this, I would like to thank you for fruitful discussion, and I believe that the audience enjoyed it. At 1 p.m. we will resume with the next briefing.